Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone all over the world, all together with the SMUS Conference Brazil Steering Committee and with the SMUS Conference Brazil organization team. It's a pleasure for me to welcome each one of you to the second international and interdisciplinary conference on spatial methods, the so-called SMUS Conference, which will be simultaneously the first RC33 Regional Conference Latin America Brazil, in cooperation with the research network Quantitative Methods, RN21, of the European Sociology Association, and take place online at the University of São Paulo, USP. This conference has been made possible by funding from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, via the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, and it is therefore an immense honor for us to welcome to this opening ceremony either Mrs. Martina Hackelberg, the German Consul General of São Paulo, and Mrs. Fabíola Gerbase, Deputy Director of the DAAD Brazil. In conceptual and logistic terms, the SMUS Conference Brazil was brought about by the joint institutional engagement of the SMUS teams, both at USP and at Technische Universität, TU, Berlin, alongside the USP Departments of Sociology and of Architectural Project, which are settled respectively at the USP Faculty of Philosophy, Languages and Human Sciences, and the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism. And I'm also happy to welcome here, on the one hand, my colleague from TU Berlin, Nina Baur, who is the SMUS director alongside Professor Angela Million from the TU Department of Architecture and Urban Planning. And on the other hand, I'm happy to welcome Professor Dr. Leopoldo Waizbort as Dean of the USP Department of Sociology, and also Professor Dr. Rubens Beçak as representative of the USP Vice-Chancellor, Professor Maria Arminda do Nascimento Arruda, who will unfortunately be unable to join us today. In fact, the SMUS Conference Brazil is one of the several outcomes of the 5 strategic actions that have been implemented by the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability, acronym precisely SMUS, which is funded by the DAAD program, Higher Education Excellence in Development Cooperation, EXCEED, and is based at the Technische Universität Berlin, Technical University of Berlin. SMUS connects 48 institutional partners from 47 countries and 8 world regions. By focusing especially on the Sustainable Development Goal, number 11 of the Agenda 2030 of the UN, of the United Nations, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, the center aims to, first of all, further the global academic and scientific exchange on social scientific methods of empirical research. Second, to offer global trainings in advanced methods. And third, to develop transdisciplinary spatial methods to improve the academic education, both in the spatial disciplines, this is architecture, geography, landscape planning, sociology, traffic planning, urban planning, and in the planning practice via evidence-based and low-impact urban development. In order to achieve these goals, the center is organized as a peer learning process, of north-south and south-south exchanges. It has been implementing these strategic actions from 2020 until 2024, such as combined teaching research courses, PhD and postdoctoral projects, practical empirical implementations, workshops, and international conferences, such precisely as the SMUS Brazil 2022. In fact, to implement these actions precisely at USP, This university and TU Berlin signed a 5-year cooperation agreement in 2020. The SMUS lead partner institution at USP is the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages and Human Sciences, and more specifically, its Department of Sociology. And hence, we arrive at the SMUS Conference Brazil. The still ongoing global uncertainties brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic have forced us to keep the online format employed at the SMUS Conference Botswana, which convened almost 1 year ago at the University of Botswana in Gaborone. Well conscious of the challenges to academic sociability implicit in this choice after 3 years of pandemic, we did our best to circumvent the essentially inhospitable nature of online academic conferences. The 6 keynotes, the 20 sessions, the 2 roundtables, and the 12 advanced method courses comprised by the SMUS Conference Brazil will be musically entangled with one another. Various talented musicians of USP offered us 6 self-composed video soundtracks of instrumental music to enrich in artistic terms the conference breaks, the break prior to the open ceremony, and also the ending of the same ceremony. I hereby thank them all in the person of Professor Ivan Vilela, who is the author of the soundtrack that introduced this opening ceremony. Inspired by this musical setting, the SMUS Conference Brazil hopes to further the global dialogue on methods by scholars and researchers from all over the world and all spatial and social sciences. And by focusing specifically on the following issues, which we will get to know in the streams of the agenda of the conference, and you are going to find them. They comprise violence, mapping, and decolonization, spatial, temporal research, and so on. Yeah, just for you to have an idea of the logics of the conference. Looking forward to the various ways in which these issues will be addressed in the framework of the conference, I hereby warmly invite you to delve as intensely as possible into the opportunities of scientific, academic, and personal exchange that the next 3 days will offer to everyone. And now it's time to hand over to Nina Baur. But before doing this, though, I would not like to miss the opportunity of publicly thanking, on the one hand, the whole SMUS Brazil conference organization team in the persons of Ana Maria Machado and Camilo Flammarion. On the other hand, the SMUS Berlin team in the person of Tando Tillmann. And last but not least, the SMUS steering committee in the person of Professor Marcia Lima. Nina, the floor is yours.
There's not so much to add on both in my roles as one of the 2 SMUS directors and as RC33 past president. I want to welcome you all to this conference. We're really, really happy that Brazil is organizing this conference because at least for RC33 and also of course for SMUS, this is the first time we are in Latin America, and Brazil in particular and Latin America as a whole has such a strong epistemological and methodological innovative tradition. So it's really exciting that we can be there. The only drawback that Fraya already mentioned is that we would have been here in Brazil for the 200 years anniversary, and we're all very sad that we could not be there in person as a result of the pandemic. The only thing I really want to add, I want to thank all those who made this conference possible. First of all, of course, Fraya herself, but also the local Brazil organizing team, not only Camilo Flammarion and Ana Maria Machado, but the whole organizing team of PhD students and doctoral students, all of who spent most of their last year on organizing these conferences, and especially in the last weeks doing night and weekend shifts. So this is a wonderful, we know how much effort this is to organize a conference. I also want to thank the local organizing team in Berlin and all the session chairs and all the people who are going to present papers for making this possible. Of course, also for the funding agency, DAAD, and the German Federal Ministry for funding this, because this is one of the major drawbacks for these kinds of conferences, that usually there is not enough funding. And again, I think especially Brazil has been hit hard in the last years. So it's also especially important to show how vibrant, lively, especially Brazilian social sciences are. So thank you to everyone. There's so many people who have made it possible, and in this sense, we're looking forward to a wonderful conference, and I don't want to take up too much speaking time from everybody else, because we're here for hearing the others and not ourselves. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nina. Hence, I would like to hand over to Leopoldo Waizbort, please.
Thank you, Fraya. Good morning, good afternoon for all. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this conference too. As a Dean of the Sociology Department, it's a really pleasure to host you during these coming days. I'm looking forward to rich discussions and debates, and wish you all a great meeting. I am sure that the discussions will lead to important results in your field of knowledge, and will offer significant contributions to sociology and other disciplines. Please let me tell you something, an experience that I had 2 days ago. Although I'm not familiar with spatial methods and the main area of this conference, when I posted the program to my research group on digital sociology, I witnessed a flurry of enthusiastic reactions. None of us work on spatial methods and urban sustainability, but the range of the themes and developments covered by the conference is much broader than one might at first imagine, as was my case. Actually, the thematic connections are quite broad, and every sociologist will find topics of interest in the various conference lectures and streams. So I can imagine that over the next few days, many discoveries, contacts, networking, and developments will fill this space we now share, and that the results will not be long in coming. So I congratulate the organizers and all the participants of the conference, and wish you all a wonderful time and a wonderful work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leopoldo. Hence, I hand over to Mrs. Fabíola Gerbase from the DAAD.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank you for the invitation so that I can represent the German Academic Exchange Service here today. I'd like to greet the colleagues, the organizers of the conference, but also all researchers and students involved in this great initiative. You are the reason for our work to exist. Well, I'm also very pleased to be able to see today results of such an important program for the DAAD as the EXCEED program. The SMUS, the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability, is one of 12 excellence centers for exchange and development, the EXCEED program, which was launched in 2009. As already Mrs. Frehse explained, it is funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development via the DAAD. And we are active here in Brazil, so it's very nice to see such a program developing and fostering the cooperation between the two countries, Brazil and Germany. These 12 projects that are being funded at the moment, they are interdisciplinary projects with different subject orientations. And this is, it was nice to hear from Ms. Baur that this is a good example to show the importance of social sciences here in Brazil. As Brazilian, I can only confirm that what you've just said, and it's also part of our work at DAAD to foster all fields, all areas of knowledge, all subject orientations. This is something very important for us. Okay, so now going back to EXCEED, just a little bit more information on that. The main goal of the EXCEED program is bringing together the involvement of German higher education institutions and their partners in developing countries and raising its public profile. This initiative also aims to make research and teaching cooperation between higher education institutions in Germany and in countries of the Global South more accessible to development cooperation. The German higher education institutions here, the nice example of TU Berlin, Technische Universität Berlin, and their partner organizations in all the Global South, Latin America, Asia, Africa, are active on site, which makes us really happy to see, making an important contribution to the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as Ms. Frehse also explained in her introductory words. So this is also a very nice moment for us because we are in Brazil. Well, the DAAD is in Brazil since 1972, which when our office was open in Rio de Janeiro, where I am at the moment. So this year we are celebrating 50 years of our presence in Brazil, which makes one more highlight. This event is one more highlight of this anniversary in Brazil, which makes us really happy. Our director, Dr. Jochen Hellmann, also asked me to greet you all and say how nice it is, how pleased he also is to see such a beautiful outcome of our work, concrete results here in Brazil and helping us foster the academic cooperation between Brazil and Germany. So I wish you all a really nice conference, debates, and that it helps you go on with this beautiful work. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Gerbase. And hence I hand over to Mrs. Martina Hackelberg. I'm very pleased. She has just started to work here in São Paulo. So it's I'm really happy to get to know you in this occasion, Mrs. Hackelberg.
Hello, good morning to all of you from São Paulo. Indeed, I'm very happy to participate in this opening ceremony. I've just started my new assignment here in São Paulo as Consul General, and it's not the first time I'm in Brazil. I've been here before from 2011 to 2014 when I was head of the Culture and Press section in Brasilia, so it's coming home. The time before I remember with very fond memories. I enjoyed very much living in this beautiful country, and the time then was also professionally very fulfilling time. German-Brazilian relations then reached a new level with high-ranking delegations visiting one after another. Our strategic partnership was strengthened with intensive dialogue on global topics such as climate change, stronger cooperation in science and technology, and with new partnerships, for example, on urban development. In the years before, Brazil's economy had grown at impressive speed. The unemployment rate was at a record low. Poverty had been greatly reduced to a point that the country was finally removed from the UN hunger map. Today, the picture is a little bit different. Brazil's economy has experienced a decade of contraction. In consequence, much of the progress achieved has been reversed. According to a recent study, around 33 million Brazilians are suffering from hunger. That means a setback to the level of the 1990s. However, Brazil is not a single case. Many countries around the world have seen a reversal of success after years of progress in eradicating poverty and hunger, improving health and education. The recent SDG report 2022 alerts us that multiple interlinked crises are threatening the achievement of the UN 2030 agenda. You have mentioned the corona pandemic before, but there's also climate change, war and conflicts that are creating spin-off impacts on food and nutrition, health, education, the environment, peace and security. It puts in danger all SDGs, including SDG 11, which addresses urban development. That means there is a lot of work to do for all of us in order to reverse this reversal. And one thing is sure, we can only achieve the SDGs together. That's why the German government is funding the important work of the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability, implemented by the DAAD. As one of 12 excellent centers for exchange and development worldwide, it promotes the global dialogue between international scholars and researchers from all over the world and all social and spatial sciences. I'm very pleased to speak to you on the opening of the second SMUS conference hosted by the University of São Paulo. This conference is a very welcome addition to the intensive and long-lasting cooperation between the Technical University of Berlin and USP on engineering. In addition, it is an excellent example of successful North-South and South-South cooperation, which is one of Germany's foreign policy priorities. The aim of benefiting from each other's experiences, to learn from and with each other to tackle worldwide challenges, is in the interest and to the advantage of us all. It allows transfer of knowledge on an equal footing. And it is an important step towards decolonization of scientific thinking. It allows us to appreciate even more the knowledge and skills which have been developed outside the horizon of the Northern Hemisphere. In times where a lot of resources and energies are still spent on problems of the North, it is important to recall that the overwhelming majority of the world population lives in the global South, where also the major growth of urban cities is happening. To begin with, the use of the term Global South is questionable too. It might be yet another practical label to differentiate and identify ourselves without necessarily telling us how our international partners view themselves. There is an obvious need to scrutinize terms and methods in social sciences as well as in diplomacy. And the discussion about it is even more important at a time when science is under attack in too many parts and countries in the world, where scientific facts are denied and fake news are spread. This is why global centers like the SMUS are so important. They give researchers a space to come together across nationalities and disciplines in order to find a common language and joint solutions for the manifold challenges of our times. Science diplomacy has thus become an important element of our foreign policy. Science, technology, and innovation can support diplomatic efforts in many ways. Not least, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that science and technology are much needed to provide the fact-based foundations for political decisions. Where policy is guided by facts, trust in political decisions is enhanced. This conference is therefore fully in line with our foreign policy priorities and especially with our objective to meet the development goals of the Agenda 2030. São Paulo, as one of the world's most populated cities, is the perfect place to host this conference. I would like to conclude by thanking all of you who have made this important and timely event possible. I wish you inspiring and productive discussions that will also create personal relationships, which are so vital for shaping a better future for us and for future generations. Thank you.
Thanks, Frau Hackelberg. Many thanks for your words. I would like to hand over now to Professor Rubens Beçak, who is representing Professor Maria Arminda do Nascimento Arruda, the USP Vice-Chancellor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here representing Professor Maria Arminda do Nascimento Arruda, our Vice-Chancellor of the University of São Paulo. I am Professor Rubens Beçak and would like, on behalf of our rectory and university, to welcome you all. It's a pleasure and an honor to the University of São Paulo, to host an event like that dedicated to such important topics for the Brazilian social sciences as the space and urbanity. Professor Maria Arminda asked me to send a special salute to Professor Dr. Nina Baur, the director and action speaker of the Special Methods for Urban Methodology, and her colleague at the Department of Sociology and SMUS Conference in Brazil coordinator, Professor Dr. Fraya Frehse. To her other colleague and dean of the Department of Sociology at the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages, and Literature and Human Sciences, Professor Dr. Leopoldo Waizbort. To the German Consul General in São Paulo, Mrs. Martina Hackelberg, and to the Deputy Director of DAAD Brazil, Mrs. Fabíola Gerbase. Here, and with your license, I'd like to read a brief salute prepared for Professor Maria Arminda. On behalf of our university, I welcome all the speakers, researchers, and the audience who are going to attend this meeting in the next 2 days. Personally, I'm glad to see the international effort for the strengthening of epistemologies and methodological approaches, which are alternative to the knowledge originally produced by the scientific communities from the developed countries. At the University of São Paulo, this goal guides us since our creation in 1934. Even the professors from the French mission, which supported the building of our departments of history, sociology, and anthropology in those early days, were deeply committed with the highlight of new issues, new theories, and new methods to understand the particularities of the Brazilian society. From this concert, new historical actors have risen as indigenous communities, the Black people, and the African Brazilian religions, the people from the countryside, the population of immigrants from abroad, and all of those who internally migrated to the cities, changing the face of Brazil from a rural to an urban country in the early 20th century. In this year of 2022, we celebrate in Brazil the 1st century anniversary of our Modernist Week, occurred in 1922, which literature, music, and paintings sowed the seeds of deep changes in our urban space and our social values. I had, Professor Maria Arminda, myself, the opportunity to analyze how the metropolitan features of the São Paulo city in the middle of the 20th century created the conditions of the strengthening of the autonomous modernist circuits in the arts for the rising of new cultural institutions and the modern social sciences to discuss new methods for the understanding of the remaining social inequalities and other challenges for sustainability is a necessary work to be done. I'm sure that Professor Dr. Frehse, who is also an heiress from this intellectual tradition, will brilliantly lead this meet. Once again, I welcome you all and wish you a productive event. Thank you very much, and thank you.
In a sequence, very instantaneously, we will keep on with our conference and really start our academic work by, I would like to invite Nina Baur and also our colleague and also a SMUS lead partner from the University of Botswana, Gabriel Faimau. It's very, very nice that we are able to start this dialogue, which is a north-south, south-south dialogue on the decolonization of the social sciences. And we are looking forward to this presentation. So our lecture is this. This is the title that is announced. And we will start now, first of all, with Gabriel.
Okay, good morning, Brazil. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon and good evening for colleagues all over the world. Gabriel is my name, and I'm based here in the University of Botswana. In this opening lecture, we would like to engage with the question of decolonizing research practice by highlighting how the process may have taken place from different perspectives. And we are going to focus on Botswana, Brazil, and Germany. Decolonizing research practice is an ongoing process. Therefore, it requires open engagement, discussion, and conversation. The SMUS conference that we are having today provides us with a special space to engage in this very important topic. For many decolonial thinkers, research cannot be separated from colonialism and imperialism. Our reading of decolonization also proved the same. For this reason, Linda Smith argues that research is one of the dirtiest words. What Smith characterized echoes the Orientalism assessment of Edward Said, as he argues that the other is, and I quote, approach systematically as a topic of learning, discovery, and practice. For many, power dynamics are embedded in research, and therefore research becomes a systematic way of undressing other people, a systematic production of other, or a systematic practice of othering, dominating, and restructuring. But is research really a dirty word? If it is, what does the decolonization of research practice imply? What risks and challenges should we consider in the process of decolonizing research? What opportunities do we have in this decolonization project? A quick mapping of decolonization scholarship shows three common approaches that I wish to examine very briefly. The first one, that ideological approach, banking on the notion of power structure that influences or shapes the production of knowledge. In this approach, colonial domination does not only shape and influence our ideas of race, class, gender, and culture, but it also involves what Santos called epistemicide, or the matter of knowledge. Decolonizing research should involve, and this according to Maldonado Torres, the dismantling of relations of power and conception of knowledge. Decolonizing research, therefore, must include undoing its dirty history, claimed Ndlovu Gatseni. While this approach, and I'm talking about ideological approach here, is successful in terms of diagnosing what the problem is and presenting a strong case for decolonizing research practice, I notice at least two main challenging assumptions. The first one, the dominant group can simply be persuaded through intellectual argument and moral appeal. And the second one, a new conception of knowledge can easily be developed in place of the dominant system of knowledge production. The second one, the second approach, reconstructive approach, focuses on other histories or historical process. The main argument here, developed particularly by Ndlovu Gatseni, he claimed, decolonizing research involves acknowledgement that colonial history is not the only history that shapes the knowledge system. Other histories or historical processes also play a critical role in the production of knowledge. It includes what Ndlovu Gatseni mentioned, processes of rethinking thinking, or learning to unlearn in order to relearn. The last one, the dialogic approach. This has been quite popular in the past couple of decades, where decolonizing research is not about diminishing a certain mode of knowledge production or epistemological approach, but it is about broadening the area of conversation and intercultural relationship. It means the dialogic approach provides a space for a cultural encounter and knowledge exchange in the context of decolonizing research. Or, as argued by Maggie, decolonizing does not necessitate a dismantling of Northern theory, but rather involves a horizontal, reflective, and conversational approach. Next, please. With this, I would like to move on to the notion of decolonial reflexivity in the context of the dialogic approach. Based on what I propose, the idea of dialogic approach, I would like to touch on the idea of decolonial reflexivity. From this, I'll move on to few attempts of decolonizing research practice in the context of Botswana. When we say decolonial reflexivity, we generally refer to acknowledging the colonial epistemology that dominates the interpretation of knowledge systems and produces a structure of authority that governs knowledge production, and at the same time setting a conversational arena for mutual exchange among different epistemologies that reflect particularities of different societies. Decolonial reflexivity is informed by three key principles that have been discussed by many decolonial scholars. The first one, the ecologies of knowledge, pluriversality, and interculturality. The phrase ecologies of knowledge, popularized by Santos, refers to the recognition of different ways of knowing by which people across the human globe provide meaning to their existence and understanding of the world. The second one, pluriversality, signifies a vision of coexistence and cooperation of many worlds in pluriverse. Decoloniality promotes pluriversality as a universal option, which means that what should be universal is in fact pluriversal. So declared Mignolo and Watts. The third one, interculturality, is not simply about dialogue or encounter between culture. As suggested by Mignolo and Watts, interculturality is also about building new different societies with new structural ordering, socio-political and cultural transformation. The dialogic approach recognizes the differences among cultures, but values the sense of interconnectedness. This basic proposition draws on the idea of recognizing the existing or the existence of different cultures and worldviews that has long been advanced by multicultural theorists such as Charles Taylor, Stuart Hall, Axel Honneth, Biko Parek, or Tariq Murad. Global South cultures generally value the idea of interconnectedness, relationship, and interdependence. In Sub-Saharan Africa, this is summarized by the philosophy of Ubuntu or Boto, with the basic principle that I am because we are, to signify an important view that we cannot exist in isolation as we live in connection and relationship with others. Next, please. Based on this, what I have proposed, I want to touch on a few attempts of decolonizing research practice in the context of Botswana. With this, I want to propose a simple ABCD model for what we have been trying to do in terms of decolonizing research practice. The first one proposed by one of our leading contemporary African scholars, Francis Nyamjo, based in the University of Cape Town, who suggests that the first step of decolonizing research practice should be about asking the right questions. Asking the right questions is about recognizing the embeddedness of social research in cultural values, as well as scientific histories that shape the culture. Between 2014 and 2017, I led a group to study the new phenomenon of prophetic churches here in Botswana. Having lived in Botswana for more than a decade, I was aware of Mbiti's statement that Africans are notoriously religious. This is to say that religion plays a major role in the way people live and relate to one another. When I developed the questionnaire, I had to include religious affiliation as one of the variables. I consulted many surveys, and in general, the existing surveys have only one question, and that is, which church or denomination do you belong to? Having known the context of Botswana, I believe this type of question is not sufficient to understand religious practices or religious affiliation in the context of Botswana. As such, I developed three related questions on the variable of religious affiliation. The first one was, what is your current church or ministry? The second one was, which church or ministry would you say you belong to? And the third one, this is very important question that we asked, and that was, which church or ministry did you last attend? And the survey results reveal that 3.3 out of 661 participants indicate that they belong to a certain church, but they go or participate in different churches. 11.7% stated that the church they last attended was other than their current churches. And moreover, in relation to family events, over 37% claim that they consulted or asked the blessings from pastors or prophets from other churches or other ministries. The second one, the B, building cultural beliefs and values into methodology. This is an argument that has been developed by one of the leading African decolonial methodologists, Bagele Chilisa. In her writings, she has been advocating a decolonial research practice that draws on African philosophies and worldviews to inform the research design and research process. Other researchers, for example, Pansiri, who did a study on ethnic minority groups in the northern part of Botswana, highlight or underline exactly the same argument. The third one, communicating from the local frame of reference. As suggested by Kekilam and Swartz, decolonizing research practice is not much about the method, but more about the spaces that can enable the research process, and that through this process, researchers' identities also become reshaped or transformed. The dialogic nature of decolonial reflexivity assumes participatory research methods that recognize local context and empower the dynamic relationship between the researcher and the researchee. Instead of the research, the object of the research, I use the term researchee to signify the research subject. For more than a decade now, 3 colleagues from the University of Botswana have developed a project called Young Women Leadership Project. In the project, the researchers, Mosime, Ntsuarang, and Mokodi, develop a process in order to explore whether the physical campus offered young women space in which to control their own gender and sexual lives. The project initially involved 3 faculty members and 13 students, but over the years, the number of participating students has fluctuated over 1,000 students. What I found interesting is that the project is designed in such a way that the faculty members and the students were researchers and participants at the same time. Following the design, the team then developed research activities to interrogate their I stories, self and campus mapping, and sexual voices. The project revealed amazing results, as the whole research process was viewed as a self-empowerment process through intergenerational dialogue. When the first results of the project were published, the researchers observed that in their I stories, young women in the project testified to how the project became their bridging platform between their families that were silent on issues of sexuality and university spaces that are hypersexual, yet oppressive to female students. Decolonial reflexivity is banking on the relationship between the researcher and the researchee. It favors participatory approach that allows the researchee to benefit directly from the project. In this approach, the researcher is the researchee, and the researchee is the researcher. The last one, diversifying research practice, is not about getting rid of existing methods, but diversifying the existing methods. In the past couple of years, we have introduced in the university a course on advanced research methodology in social sciences for our MPhil and PhD candidates. In this course, we tried to diversify different methods of data collection using the common practice or the common context that we are facing in Botswana. The attempt that we are making highlights the fact that although we are using the common methods of data collection that we already know, diversifying the existing methods meaning reading the context within which the study is conducted, reading the needs of the study population or those who participate in the study, and responding to the needs culturally, socially, politically, or economically to the needs of the research participants. Over to you, Fraya.
So, okay, I would thank Gabriel for this introduction, because I think it's mainly the last slide very nicely shows what I want to argue for, because what my wish here in my time is to invite you to the following question, actually, or to the following reflection. What do this decolonizing theories of decolonization, as such, they stem from intellectuals who grew up in Latin America. If we consider, for example, sorry, I'm having problems here. My structure will be three three-part structure, yes, the role of Latin America in decolonization theories, and then the one forerunning decolonization research practice tradition in Brazil, and also challenges of the present. And why have I structured my talk in this terms? Because I indeed wanted to address, as it were, the what was a kind of decolonization reflection and practice prior to this decolonization debate, yes? And that's why Gabriel's last slide is very interesting for me, because what I would like to argue here is that we have in Brazil, we have a tradition, and I'm actually at my university, in the social sciences of the University of São Paulo, which prior to this decolonization debate, at the end of the day, we're trying or to address this kind of preoccupation, epistemological preoccupation that decolonization theories address. So this is my argument, and I would like to develop this here. So first of all, I would like to start by considering that the theories of decolonization stem from intellectuals. For the start of this debate and decoloniality and the modernity decoloniality group, they stem from intellectuals who grew up in Latin America. And so, sorry, I'm having problems with my, so Aníbal Quijano, who was a sociologist who grew up in Peru and then went to the United States. Enrique Dussel, philosopher, who grew up and was born and grew up in Argentina and then went to Mexico. And Walter Mignolo, who was born in Argentina and lives in the United States. So at the end of the day, and if we consider Brazil, the insertion of the Brazilian social sciences, that if we consider, I did an exploratory literature research about this issue of decolonization and the social sciences, or not only social sciences, but human sciences in Brazil. And we really are able to grasp on the Web of Science, we are able to grasp that mainly in the last 10 years, articles and also made other publications addressing this issue of decolonization in terms of what Gabriel showed us, these three, or mainly these two approaches, the ideological approach and the reconstructive approach, mainly in history and geography and in anthropology. Obviously, we could say that, oh, yeah, this has to do, this increase of decolonial studies in Brazil has a lot to do, obviously, with the increase in the globalization of social scientific knowledge since the years 2000. The impact of this debate, which, as we saw with Gabriel, also applies to Africa. Yes, but given this overall, against the background of this, the backdrop of this context, I would like to pose the following question. What does the history of the social sciences in Brazil disclose about decolonization of research practice? And I hope to show you that we will, at the end of my talk, I hope to show that it links to Gabriel's last slide. So what Gabriel has shown about this research practice in Africa, trying to assure a kind of decolonial reflexivity or decolonization reflexivity, what I would like to argue is that we have a tradition here, and specifically at USP, but obviously there are other sources in Brazil and in Latin America too, but I would like to focus on USP because we are here at this university, and it's a tradition that was very it was very important, especially, and this is my statement, that there's one long-standing epistemological tradition of research practice, decolonization in Brazil, and it is prior to the decolonization debate as such. Yeah, I know that it can sound a bit provocative, but this is what I want to do here, because we are in a discussion with in a global discussion indeed. Yes, so I would like to address this issue by saying that my argument is that the first two generations in the social sciences at USP, I would like to refer to these people, yes? And this is also a way of introducing this conference audience to the university that is hosting our event, yes? So my argument is that I will try to address a little bit very briefly due to the time but to address a little bit this issue of these first two generations of social scientists in Brazil, and these what I call here decolonization forerunning reflections in Brazil. Yes, so this is actually a tradition that I would say, and this is also something that Professor Rubens Beçak in his talk, and specifically Professor Maria Arminda, the text she delivered via Professor Beçak, I think it shows this very well, that we have a tradition and the onset of the academic Brazilian social sciences, which actually which in the 1930s started to develop and to become institutionalized at the university, because indeed Brazil's first modern, scientifically multifaceted university in Brazil is the University of São Paulo, which was founded in 1934. Yes, and so I would like to argue that we have a kind of tradition that was established at this university amidst the overall quest among Brazilian intellectuals of the time. They were searching for the roots of Brazil, for the evolution of Brazil. So there was always a quest for returning to the past, and especially to the colonial and to the slaveholding past, in order to explain the present and the problems of the present too. So the proposition, obviously, of these authors was that it was, as we would say nowadays, we would say, oh, they had a methodological nationalism. So they were just focused on Brazil and Brazil, specificities of Brazil, and always in this relationship to the global north and specifically to the Western world. But obviously this is true. I'm not arguing for an anachronism, yes, but this was globally valid for other parts of the globe too, and it came alongside the social scientific belief in the worldwide spread of European modernity, which, by the way, was the commonsensical way of relating to European and North American values, conceptions, goods, and infrastructure in Brazil. So what the social scientists did was, at the end of the day, when they just very strongly focused on influences of Europe and what do we do with that and so on, Europe and the United States, but mainly Europe, they were just assuming as a kind of reality something that was commonsensically spread, socially spread in Brazilian society at that time, that really, things coming from Europe, because we cannot forget that this is a way of addressing life and everyday life when we live in a former colony like Brazil. Yes, so indeed, and this is my focus here, there started to develop, tradition started to evolve, very concentrated on the specificities, the particularities regarding Europe and the USA. Obviously, there was no comparative empirical research with Africa at that time, for example. One of the first forerunner of this kind of attention to Africa was precisely one of the professors of the University of São Paulo, Roger Bastide, I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes. So, indeed, our first sociology professors, among them were Claude Lévi-Strauss, and his successor at the University of São Paulo, Roger Bastide, the first of one a Belgian, the second one a French. And they were, as it were, they usually use this kind of formulation, that they were very keen on understanding Brazilian society on its own terms. Yes, Bastide, as such, has a revealing reflection on this issue in a late interview about his USP experience, which lasted from 1938 to 1954. It's actually, he was part of this French mission Maria Arminda talked about in the opening ceremony. Bastide, in this interview, he said that his aim when he arrived here in Brazil to teach sociology at USP was to extract from reality a Brazilian theory without imposing on Brazilian facts a sociology born in North America or in Europe. Not that one could not find afterwards a convergence, but one had to start from Brazilian realities. Yes, so actually there was a quest, a search of situated knowledge about a country with strong colonial and strong slaveholding roots. And the 200th jubilee of the Brazilian independence from Portugal was celebrated yesterday. Né? And Brazil was the last Western country to officially abolish slavery in 1888. So indeed, the Brazilian students of these French this was what we used to call the French mission. Né? The Brazilian students of these guys and their successors, the successors of these students, they developed their empirical research, putting an emphasis precisely on a quest, and this is my argument here, a quest for method. They did it not only saying, yeah, let's try to find out what is specific for Brazil, but doing that, but focusing on method and a quest for method that assured a kind of we would say, by using the nowadays term, a kind of decolonization reflexivity, like Gabriel proposed it, but historically prior to the establishment debate of the debate of decolonization as such. Yes, so I'm actually addressing the so-called São Paulo Sociological School, which was all researched actually by Maria Arminda do Nascimento Arruda. She was one of the important researchers of that about that school. So the best fully fledged example to show you a little bit in a synthetic way what I'm talking about is Florestan Fernandes' work. Florestan Fernandes, he was, as it were, our Durkheim, yes? He was, due to his engagement in institutionalizing sociology as a scientific discipline among us. And Robert Merton, the American functionalist sociologist, Robert Merton, explicitly referred to Florestan Fernandes in his Social Theory and Social Structure as having authored one of the most important critical appraisals of the functional theory by 1968, particularly Florestan Fernandes' remarkable book named Empirical Foundations of Sociological Explanation, which unfortunately was never translated into English. So what I would like to stress here are two epistemological traits Florestan Fernandes always emphasized in his reflections, yes, which were, first of all, the distinction he proposed between interpretive and operational methods when we go to the field, when we do research, yes? So you have to consider that in sociology, research, empirical research, inevitably counts both on theoretically loaded methods of interpretation and on operational methods of investigation. So we would have to have this distinction clear. If we face Brazilian empiricism, yes, and the operational, and this is what has to do with Gabriel's last slide, the operational and methods we use in the field, they are very strongly qualitative, but not only. The importance is creativity based on the quest for empirically strongly rooted methods of interpretation. So even if we use methods of interpretation that come from abroad, as it were, because the global north is a factory of theories, as Nina will show us, yeah. But this does not mean that we are not able to produce our theoretical approaches to this kind of reality, but we have to consider that there will be always a dialogue, like as Gabriel also proposed. So, just to give an idea, very, very briefly here, Fernandes, for example, he was not alone in his quest for really addressing, with the aid of very creatively, not only documentary research, but sometimes also with interviews, but also sometimes with ethnography and so on, the social margins of this country, yes? So blacks in post-holding slavery São Paulo. And he was not alone, for example. There were other colleagues of the same generation. Gilda de Mello e Souza, who studied fashion in Brazil. Fashion at that time in Brazil, fashion in the 19th century in Brazil, yes? Peasants amidst urbanization, for example, Maria Isaura Pereira de Queiroz, Antônio Cândido de Mello e Souza, indigenous peoples and class society, Roberto Cardoso de Oliveira, the youth in Brazilian society at that time, businessmen in slaveholding Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso and Ottaviani. So what I'm actually showing you is that this we have a kind of methodological concern which is of a spatial origin, to actually consider space in social terms and to focus, to develop empirical research based on a methodological reflection on the importance of considering margins, and this is also an argument that my former professor and colleague José de Souza Martins develops a lot about this tradition, yes? So they produced, by focusing on these, as it were, marginalized subjects of the society, of Brazilian society, yes? Not only human types, but also issues like, for example, fashion in a slaveholding society, yes? There was the production of they used to say, rooted, empirically grounded theoretical approaches, yes? We are not talking about self-contained systematic theories, yes, but in a kind of quest for method, to have a look at that, but by considering this double dimension of methods, yes, in order to address the so-called specificities of Brazilian society, what is typical of Brazil, but not only what is typical, but mainly what are the problems of a society that stems from such a strong colonial and slaveholding past. The last military dictatorship in Brazil strongly harmed this tradition by establishing the compulsory retirement of Florestan Fernandes, of Cardoso, of Ottaviani, and many others. And nowadays, scholars that explicitly attach their research practice to these traditions may still be found at the University of São Paulo and at my department, and I myself am one of them. And now I really would like to finish here my reflection by just addressing some obvious problems I see, which have to do with the present. There are some epistemological challenges of the present for this kind of quest for, let's understand Brazil, in inverted commas, in its own terms. First of all, obviously, the fact that we nowadays know, and due to the kind of issue that is being addressed in this lecture, that decolonization is a presupposition. It translates into positionality, the importance of really very strong critical reflexivity about the own position of the researcher, which was something completely absent from these authors. There is another no-go is the belief in a worldwide spread of Western modernity, which was actually the parameter for these guys. Methodological national limit is a no-go either. So we have at least three challenges here. And we also have other referential spaces, not so much the country, Brazil or Latin America as a region and so on, but global and local dynamics experienced bodily in everyday life in urban, rural, forest, public, intimate, digital spaces. né? And we also have different various times, which is something that this tradition worked a lot with historical processes. So, let's understand the present by addressing the past. But nowadays we have and sociology is very everyday life sociology is very keen on addressing this issue. Phenomenology, various time, better stated temporalities, the historicity of social processes along the now and then of situations of social interactions and so on, amidst the immensely long durée of the Anthropocene, and then what to do in this with this quest for a situated knowledge, for understanding any context in its own terms and Brazil in its own terms. And then I would like to address here that my experience at SMUS and at the Center for Studies and Research in the Sociology of Space and Time, LIPSESTU, with my students, we have been working a lot and trying to develop a kind of spatially and temporally rooted sociology. So my argument that we should focus on space and time in social and relational terms as methodological categories in order to address social practice and everyday life and try to assure a kind of rooted and decolonial, who knows, way of doing research. And now I hand over to Nina Baur for her to address the German issue, the German contexts.
Well, we're coming back from the global south to the global north. As you can see, what has been demanded for a long time about decentering and delinking. So this, both the center and our talks are practical attempts of starting this kind of delinking and decentralizing. And if you start thinking about it, and also from the experiences of the last years in SMUS, there's a first point I want to make, which is important for epistemological debates. Next slide, please. One of the things that strikes me is actually monolithic assumptions in the decolonial debate about the global north or about Eurocentrism or about the West. Because if you're looking at what, maybe not consciously, but actually in practice, researchers from the global south are talking about, is that they actually have in their mind Anglo-Saxon countries. That means countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand. Please note that most of those are not even in Europe. So actually the term Eurocentrism is a little bit misplaced, and somehow Australia managed to get itself framed as global south, but depending on if this is about geography or about economic power, it's displaced or not. The second one, implicit assumption or the image of the global north is actually, if you look at it in detail, is both the lifestyles and the mindsets of the elites of these countries. So we're talking about the upper 0.5%, at best the upper 1 or 2% of the populations. These were historically nobles, the church elite, that was also historically nobles, and bourgeois merchants. So not even all traders, but very rich patricians, which had a special position in European society. And today we're talking about capitalist elites. This is important because in parallel to colonialization, in the political developments of Europe and unrests, one of the aims of Enlightenment, for example, was exactly to get rid of these elites and their power. Next slide, please. So this is not only important from a social process perspective, but also has epistemological consequences, because these elites always used knowledge and means of knowledge as a system of power, and keeping specific types of the population, meaning the other 98%, both away from knowledge and thinking of the same. The system of doing this was in pre-industrial universities, was both the way the universities are organized and also the epistemology. On a very general level, this means that the pre-industrial universities were organized by the dregs of as means of not producing but of controlling knowledge, about replicating, parroting canonized knowledge instead of individual thought. And then in the early 19th century, governments also discovered knowledge as a source of power, for example, in the role of statistics in public administrations, but also geography, and in the competition of nations. This is important because if you look at works from scholars from the Global South, for example, just to mention Francis Naumio, which Gabriel also already mentioned, this model of knowledge was implemented in the course of colonialism in large parts of the Global South, and for example, from what I read, seems to have been the dominant model of knowledge production in Africa. This is also important because to understand Enlightenment, while in post-colonial critiques, it's mostly depicted as a colonial program. Actually, Enlightenment was the aims of the rest of the European population to empower themselves. It's also to know that a lot of the thinkers, for example, Immanuel Kant, are actually very badly translated to English, starting with that the German word Geist doesn't mean a mind, but there's a conception in German where Geist means both spirit and mind combined, and they're not even separated. But for example, a typical icon wording of Kant is "Habe Mut, dich deines Verstandes zu gebrauchen." Now, in the English language translation, which then got somehow deformed in academic discourses and implemented on the Global South, this somehow came across that the mind is supposed to control the body and spirit, and this is about dominance and othering. Just the actual translation, if you take the original, "Habe Mut, dich deines Verstandes zu gebrauchen," has a completely different meaning. It means dare to think by yourself, be brave enough to think by yourself. So actually, Kant and other Enlightenment things are exactly the opposite of what is depicted in a lot of these the colonial debates. It's about emancipation from these pre-industrial models of knowledge control. It's about emancipation from the dominance of state and church and capital, and making knowledge production available to the general public. Next slide, please. So on a global level, on the global system of science, like in Europe, there were actually in parallel two models of science. Actually, science is a bad word because the German word Wissenschaft actually translates to academia and science. So it's much more fluent. So there were, but regardless, there were two models of science. The German one, which became the standard model of continental Europe, and the British one, which became the standard model for the Anglo-Saxon model. And only after World War II, the Anglo-Saxon model became the dominant model of science. Now, as I'm from Germany and I'm growing up in the German model of science, this model of science is actually the one I grew up with, and the epistemological ideas are much different. This is, first of all, the Humboldt idea of universities as universities in learning is supposed to be locally embedded. Universities are supposed to be locally embedded, equal stages, centers of learning, which try to not decrease power to production to any minimum. Every scholar is supposed to be both teaching and doing research. The aims is both the idea of training the next generation, but also there is an epistemological claim that there is some kind of mutual learning, that with the advanced style academics having more access to the discipline in knowledge, and the younger scholars having a more open mind and will ask new questions. So this is all about asking questions and therefore big challenges. So you can see this is a very different model of science than the one that has been depicted in a lot of colonial debates. Next slides, please. starting from this general frame of sciences, which got invented in the early 19th century in Germany, against this background, German sociology developed, from a very specific double background. First of all, at that time, there was a huge side which are called social questions, die soziale Frage. So there were social issues connected with industrialization, urbanization, and increase of poverty, working class and working class struggles. So one challenge was how to solve these issues. And the reasons I'm bringing this up is, as you can see, these are a lot of issues which are especially in the global south, but not only there, prominent up to today and are actually resurging in recent decades. However, more importantly, German sociology actually developed as from an epistemological critique as a result of the so-called value judgment debate, which pointed out a dilemma. The dilemma was that at that time, constructivism was showed and claimed that every knowledge depends on local knowledge systems. So as you can say, this is a lot of what, very similar to what has been claimed in decolonial debates today, but was already part of a debate in the mid-19th century in Germany. At the same time, there was the positivist traditions, which said, yeah, okay, fair enough, but we still need some kind of objectivity, common ground, whatever, for several reasons. First of all, they showed that every field is empowered. This is not only true for the political actors like state actors, but every single small community, every poor area, there's always power processes. And if you don't reflect about and compare, take these power processes in the field in mind, you will just reduce the power structures in the field. The second issue is that while we might want to and need to understand locally about knowledge, when talking about social inequality, we still want to do comparisons. For example, we would want to do sentence like saying that the average person in Chad is poorer than the average person in Germany. So if we don't find some kind of means of comparison and at least keep up to the ideal objectivity, we cannot even do these kind of comparisons. So this was a big debate in the 19th century, and in that course, actors like Max Weber and Werner Sombart argued that there should be a middle ground, which is why in German they're called sociology as Kulturwissenschaft, as cultural or social science, to actually find a middle ground between these debates. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is not some claim of debates being outdated or anything. On the contrary, there is a lot to improve on these debates, but more that just showing that there is actually a lot of options to link between specifically German epistemological debates, the way the system of science is organized in both what we've been discussing, what the ideal would be, for example, for African social sciences or Latin American social sciences, which would make it much easier to build on this kind of dialogue. Next slide, please. In order for this dialogue to happen, what is important is to assess that today we have a very variety of epistemic schools, not only in the global south, but also in the global north. I just gave a look to show that it's not as simple as saying, oh, there's constructivism and positivism. There's a lot of schools, and the common ground in all the more commonly used schools, at least in Germany, is that the strong role of reflecting positionality, that every knowledge is locally bound and therefore has to be interpretive, the strong role of reflexivity and self-reflexivity, and there has been a long ongoing debate about what to do about this, and this is why in German sociology, both theory and methods, and in this course, epistemological debates play such a long ground role. Concerning theory, the idea of social theory from the German point of view is that it's a tool of improving reflexivity and self-reflexivity, because theories point out, by focusing, point out specific blind spots of other theories. So there is not one best theory, but in dialogue, the theories can point out what is missing. Methods are not about rational techniques about creating each other. One idea is that methods are supposed to be a knowledge that no knowledge is truly objective, but there's always interpretation that they're supposed to be techniques for making them as objective as possible, which is different from making them objective. But especially methods are there as techniques for improving and training reflexivity. This is why methods and methodology, at least from a German point of view, always has to include epistemology in philosophy and science. And in fact, in our traditional first year training, this is what we start with. Finally, an important issue about these methodologies is that all kind of research is embedded necessarily in social context. To come back to Gabriel, is like we're not by ourselves, we are all part of our context. So any kind of social science knowledge production is and has to be by necessity ingrained in sociological everyday practice. And it is ingrained like this via early stage training at the university. And part of the habitus of a good sociologist is taking that in mind. Next slide, please. So from a very German point of view, I would say what has been internationally framed as decolonial methods or methodology is actually what I would term are good methods. So with everything Gabriel, for example, to come back and Fraya have started, I would agree in saying these are starting points of what we had to do. From our debates, I would actually add three extra points. There will probably be more once we start discussing about it. But next slide, please. The first one is that actually we do not, like when talking about methods and methodology, we have to think, I think we have to come back away from simple binarities. Not only talking about the global South and the global North. If you look at the varieties of countries that are in the SMUS network, probably every social context needs specific methodologies, and it does make sense to talk about when we can copy from each other. But then when we have to be locally ground. But in addition, I think we have to also take into account other inequalities, class, race, gender, but also caste and the like, and thinking how they imply not only in our fields, but also how they affect the way we're doing science. This coming to my second point, you can see that also already when talking about this, we're struggling with translating to English. And I believe that in social science, we're taking language not seriously enough, both as a language, both as a tool of thought and power. There's a lot of things that you can think in specific languages that you cannot think or say in English, or that get distorted. But more importantly, if we want to look at the deprived populations, which is one of the most important challenges for social scientists to analyze what they need. In most countries of the world, the more excluded a person is, the less likely they are to speak English. So if we don't take language as a tool of empirical research seriously, how are we ever going to do research on the persons who know to be part of our research and to find their worldviews and take their worldview seriously? Now, the final point I want to add, and this is more about like when I read the colonial debates. From a German point of view, you don't have to tell us that knowledge is locally bound, and that European methodology is conducted by a European perspective. We know. We also know that we have blind spots because everybody has blind spots. However, the nature of a blind spot is that you don't see your own blind spots. So what we would actually need from a German point of view is moving a step behind. both getting told where are exactly the blind spots, but also, and this is much more important, and both Gabriel and Fraya has stressed this, we need suggestions of how to make this better. And these suggestions have to come from the global south, because if they came from the global north, that would actually replicate exactly the kind of model of knowledge production that we want to overcome. And this is why we're here at this conference. And in this sense, we're looking very much forward to listen to all the wonderful talks and having wonderful discussions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Nina. I'm very, very happy that we managed to, we're talking so much time about finally having this kind of encounter, Gabriel, you and me, and now it has become possible, and I'm very happy about that.